Hi, this is Darren Sugiyama, managing partner of Landsmark Capital. On today's webinar, we are going to be talking about one of the most controversial issues in the insurance industry right now, and that is how will AG 49A affect our life insurance industry. So we all know that AG 49 has been around for a couple of years now, and it has definitely affected the way that we are able to show a client what their potential outcomes would be in a cash value driven life insurance policy. So, for those of you that are advisors and are recommending index universal life insurance policies to your clients, this is going to directly apply to you. And with the new regulations that are coming out in November of this year, 2020, they're going to put some even more stringent restrictions on what we can and cannot show our clients. So, today we're going to talk about what those restrictions are and what we are doing at Landsmark Capital to more transparently explain to our clients what it is that they are actually buying if they buy an IUL, and in our case, more specifically, a premium financed IUL. So just a few weeks ago, I had the honor of co-presenting with Stephen Mitchell, who is the product guru at Pacific Life. Every 2 years, Pacific Life hosts a symposium, a national symposium. They usually do it in sunny Huntington Beach, California. They do that every 2 years. This year, because of COVID, they hosted their symposium in a virtual format. So this was went from September 21st to September 24th. We had a great turnout in our session, and as Stephen and I co-presented this particular issue, this AG 49 issue, we really focused on the how the regulators are looking at multiplier IULs. And again, the purpose of this particular webinar we're going to do now, this is independent of Pacific Life, not hosted by Pacific Life. This is hosted by Landsmark Capital. We are going to talk about some of these issues when it comes to how the regulators are looking at these multiplier IULs. So the question, I think, on everyone's mind, and certainly the AG 49 regulators' minds, is selling these IULs with multipliers, is this a risky business proposition? Well, I remember when multipliers first came out, it was kind of a split perspective on whether these things were good for our industry and good for our clients, or if they were bad for the industry and bad for the clients. The interesting thing is that most people's perspective on this issue was purely emotional and speculative at best. From a mathematical standpoint, I did not see anyone really having the ability to mathematically model these different crediting methods that came with these pretty substantial charges from a mathematical standpoint. So that's what we did at Landsmark Capital. We built our own internal software to be able to model these crediting methods that these multiplier IULs use. So as an example, what we're looking at on the screen here, this is one of Pacific Life's products. It's called the PIA6. At Landsmark Capital, we're big fans of this particular product. And with many of their multiplier IULs, as well as several other carriers' IULs that have multiplier features, there are different multiplier options you can choose from. So on the far left-hand side of the screen, Pac Life calls this the Classic. The Classic has no multiplier charge as well as no multiplier credit. So this is just kind of a traditional vanilla IUL with a cap and a floor. In the middle section there, they call this multiplier option the Performance option. It has a multiplier charge that's an asset-based charge, a percentage of the average monthly accumulated value of the policy. And for that charge, you're getting a multiplier bonus. So in the column that says current performance factor, that amount is being multiplied by the index credit. So in other words, let's say you earned a 6% index credit in a given year. Your policy would credit 6% times the current performance factor. So in the far right-hand side, this is their most aggressive multiplier product. They call this the Performance Plus option. And like I said, they are charging you an asset-based charge, And for that, you are getting a multiplier bonus. So if we look down in policy years 10 through 20, about 2/3 of the way down the screen there, the annualized charge is 7.5%. So that means they're going to charge you 7.5% of your accumulated value. And for that, you're going to get a multiplier bonus of 2.76x. In other words, you're getting 2.76 times whatever the index credit would have been in that given year. Again, for that, they're charging you 7.5% of your accumulated policy value. So we're going to get into this discussion and really take a good look from a mathematical perspective of whether or not this value proposition is a good thing or a bad thing. Does it hold water? When does it hold water? When does it not hold water? And again, take a real mathematical approach. The challenge with the AG49 restrictions is that currently the AG49 ruling restricts how much an agent can illustrate the index credit. So currently, the maximum allowable illustrated rate you can show is the average of every 25-year run over the last 65 years. And so that's how the regulators have restricted the maximum allowable illustrated index credit you can show in a carrier illustration. Come November of this year, 2020, things are going to get even more stringent in terms of the restrictions. So not only do we have a maximum allowable illustrated rate, the new ruling is that we will not be able to show the multiplier enhancement in a carrier illustration. So for certain carriers, that is going to be very, very troubling, especially the carriers that rely on the multiplier bonus and benefit or effect to enhance the cash value growth, which would in turn enhance the ability to draw down future income streams from the policy. But one of the things that folks are really not concentrating on at all that is paramount to concentrate on regarding this AG49A restriction update is that currently the policy illustration, the carrier illustration, allows a maximum spread or a maximum positive arbitrage between the index credit and the participating loan rate or the index loan rate to be a maximum of 1%. So in other words, if you're showing in the policy is crediting, let's just say arbitrarily 5%, that you could show a participating loan rate as low as 4%, right? Whether it be the 1% differential between the policy index crediting rate and the participating loan rate. Well, come November of this year, 2020, AG49 ruling is now saying that the maximum positive arbitrage spread you can illustrate is now 50 basis points. What that means is that for advisors that are selling off of the carrier illustration, and if they're selling an IUL for accumulation and income purposes, the income that you're going to be able to illustrate coming out of the policy will be far less than it was before this enhanced restriction, because the spread between the participating loan rate and the index credit is going from 1% down to 50 basis points. So the illustrated income is going to be substantially less. Now, for some advisors, and probably for some carriers and some BGAs and some marketing organizations, when they really understand the effect that's going to have on the policy illustration or the carrier illustration, they are going to feel like the sky is falling because the value proposition will not be illustrated in the carrier illustration. So as I said, we do have a solution for that as an independent firm. So here are the concerns that the anti-multiplier folks have, the criticisms they have of IUL multipliers. The first one is that the carrier illustrations will only show a pre-multiplier index credit, yet the cash value and the income drawdowns reflect the multiplier bonus. So in other words, what that means is if you're showing in the carrier illustration a 5.41% index credit, if you're showing that with a multiplier, if the multiplier was 1.72x on a 5.41% index credit, the actual index credit would be illustrated at 9.31%. The anti-multiplier folks out there, the criticism they have is, well, that's being deceiving because you're only showing a 5.41% index credit, yet the cash value growth is reflective of a 9.31% index credit. I have to be unbiased as I analyze both sides of the parties. It almost gets political. They're very adversarial, one side versus the other. I have to say, as much as I'm a fan of multiplier IULs, I will say that this is a legitimate criticism of IULs, because if the illustration says 5.41, but the cash value growth assumes a 9.31% credit, I could see how some folks would say, well, that is being misleading, even though all the plan documents, the policy documents explain what the multiplier bonus is and the charges and everything. If someone's just looking at this on the surface from kind of a veneer standpoint, showing 5.41% assumption with a 9.31% actual credit, I could see how their criticisms could hold some water. So that's the first criticism. The second criticism is that the carriers are only going to show a positive static index return every year where the after multiplier credit is greater than the participating loan rate. Okay? I've got to agree with that as well. Right? So one thing we know is if you show a carrier illustration at whatever it is, 5%, 5.5%, whatever it is that you're showing, that one thing's for sure is that the S&P 500 is never going to do 5.5% every year, year after year after year, right? You're going to have volatility. Some years it'll produce a greater return, some years it will produce a lesser return, and some years it's going to create a 0% return. So if you're showing a positive return in the policy at 5.41%, which is Pac Life's AG49 max at the moment, and you also show income coming out assuming a 4.65% participating loan rate, which is what their participating loan rate is as of October 2020, at the time I'm doing this recording. That means that you're showing a positive arbitrage between the policy index credit and the participating loan rate. So I could see how that could also be perceived as being misleading, because that will not happen every single year, year after year. And then the last thing here is that in the years that the policy credits zero because the S&P produced a negative return, if the pre-multiplier credit was zero, remember that even in those years, there is a multiplier charge, right? So you have a drag on the cash value of the policy in that given year. But you also have no multiplier bonus benefit. In other words, if the multiplier bonus is, say, 1.72x, well, 0% times 1.72x is still 0. So in some of these situations, the asset-based charge with Pacific Life specifically, in their more aggressive multiplier product, the asset-based charge is as high as 7.5%. So in a 0% index crediting year, you are actually having a negative 7.5% effect on your cash value, in addition to the other policy charges that are not multiplier associated. So those are the concerns that these anti-multiplier IUL folks have. And some of the criticisms, they do so hold some water. Some, right? I'll define what I mean by some as we go through this. The challenge that I have with both extreme sides of perspectives on this is that neither one of them are completely accurate, right? So as we at LionsMark Capital take a very unbiased approach, a mathematical-based approach, what we have found is that oftentimes the optics on these multiplier IULs is not always in line with the truth. Now, what do I mean by the truth? The truth is the true mathematical outcome. What would actually happen in reality with these types of products and these types of crediting methods? That's what we really want to get to. We want to get to the bottom line. So what we see on this TV screen right here, it looks like the guy on the left is stabbing the guy on the right in the throat with a knife. Well, the reality is that is a very small viewpoint of what is actually happening. What is actually happening is the knife that looks like it's stabbing the guy in the throat is actually the toe of the shoe of a man that's running away from the attacker. The real attacker is on the right. The soon-to-be victim is on the left. So again, the optics don't always tell you the full story. So what we do, we want to get to the damn truth. Right? Now, if you've ever seen Jack Nicholson in this role where he played Colonel Jessup in the movie A Few Good Men, the famous scene is when they're in court and he yells out, you can't handle the truth. Well, the question is, what is the real truth? That's what we're going to get to. What I would say that any logical, intelligent, truth-seeking person would want to know is they would want the advisor to show me the money, right? How does this actually work? Now, the disclaimer here is that the thoughts and opinions of Colonel Jessup in A Few Good Men and Jerry Maguire in the movie Jerry Maguire do not necessarily reflect those opinions of Landsmark Capital or Pacific Life or anyone else that is mentioned in this webinar. We just thought we'd have some fun with you and show you some fun slides here. But really, I mean, if you really want to get to the truth, you got to show me the money. You got to show me how this actually works. And that's what we're going to do in this webinar today. So what our software, our proprietary software that we built in-house does is we can actually model certain models showing back testing, in other words, historical S&P 500 performance that includes volatility, and really get to the bottom line of the mathematical truth. We look at 3 different 40-year periods that we produce our mathematical models under. The first one is a 40-year look back from last year. So 2019, rolling back 40 years. Those are the S&P historical performance percentages, right, you see on the screen there. The compounded annual growth rate, including the S&P dividends during that period, was 11.84%. Not including the S&P dividends was 8.86%. And so the numbers you're seeing on the screen there do not include the S&P dividends because in the IUL policy, the index credit is based off of, if you're doing S&P point to point, is based off of the S&P returns that do not include the S&P dividends. So the first 40-year run, we use the last 40 years of the S&P. The second version we do includes the last 20 years of S&P performance, the years 2000 through 2019. And we take that 20-year period and we run it back-to-back, consecutive 20-year period, to create a hypothetical 40-year period. In this construction here, the compound annual growth rate during this historical period, including the S&P dividends, was 6.01%. Not including the dividends was 3.99%. And then, of course, we have, on the far right-hand side, we have what we call the sandwich. The sandwich includes in years 1 through 10, the years 2000 through 2009, the worst decade in the history of the S&P 500. We start out with 3 zeros in a row, and we repeat that decade in years 31 through 40. As you see there again, starting off, it's negative 10, negative 13, negative 23%. Of course, we hit negative 38% in the 9th year, which was the year 2008. And sandwiched in between those 2 decades there are the last 20 years of the S&P 500. So not including dividends, again, in that scenario there, we're talking about a 59 basis point compounded annual growth rate, which is pretty crazy because I don't know anybody I don't know any advisor that is showing an illustration run at a 59 basis point index credit, annual index credit. So what our perspective is at Landsmark Capital is we want to transparently show the client what the worst case scenario would be, could be, even if that worst case scenario is a very unrealistic scenario. I would call the sandwich period here a very unrealistic worst case scenario because, again, it's assuming a 59 basis point annual index credit, which would be insane, okay, insanely poor. So we're going to start out with the worst case. So what we did here, this is a 61-year-old female living in Texas, rated at standard non-tobacco, and for her we modeled the PS6 product with Pacific Life. Okay, so let's start with that. The disclaimer that we use when we do the look back periods are we show the carrier illustration, right, with the fixed rate. We start off showing them that. We always end the point of sale focusing on that compliance approved carrier illustration. But we also want to educate the client so they understand how the crediting methods work. We want them to understand how the charges work. If they are considering using a multiplier IUL, we want them to understand how the multiplier charges and multiplier bonuses work. So what we do is we create a hypothetical, we call it a synthetic index account that is correlated with the S&P 500. Okay, this hypothetical account, we use it, the crediting method again is correlated with the S&P, but we use a 0% floor and an 8.5% cap with certain charges, certain asset-based charges, and certain multiplier credits applied to the gross index credits. Now, the parameters we're using for the crediting method with the floor and the cap, the charges and the bonuses, are a mirror reflection of the same parameters in the Pacific Life PS6 product in this particular version. But this is not the PS6 product. Okay, this is a hypothetical index account that just so happens to show the same client outlay, the same crediting methods, the same charges. Okay, so we say these numbers do not represent any specific life insurance policy from any specific carrier. This is merely a hypothetical example of such hypothetical non-insurance based index fund. Okay, so let's get into this now. We're going to take a look at the multiplier charges. In this particular scenario here, we are looking at the most aggressive multiplier product. This is the Performance Plus multiplier charge and multiplier bonus structure that we're going to model in our independent non-insurance policy index fund. Right? Again, this is the hypothetical fund. This is not a life insurance policy here. So the multiplier charges, we're going to use charges that look very similar to the Performance Plus multiplier charges. And we're also going to use the multiplier bonus factors that look very similar to the Performance Plus bonus charges in Pac Life's PS6 product. And in that next yellow box that just popped up there, on the right-hand column, we have the standard policy charges, or I should say charges, that are the same as the standard policy charges in that product. We're taking the same charges that occur in the premium load charges, the administrative load charges, the cost of insurance charges, etc. So we just take the same dollar charges and apply them. And then we calculate the multiplier charges based on the multiplier charge percentages in the far left-hand column. Okay? So why do we do all this? The reason we do this is we want to take a look at the most volatile times where the multiplier charge is creating a very substantial drag on the account value during the years where the gross index credit would be zero because the S&P produced a negative return. Okay, and that's what we're seeing there. We were looking now at the 31st year into this hypothetical program. And in that year, years 31, 32, and 33, we are assuming the S&P returns in the years 2000, 2001, 2002. Okay, so in those years, this account would receive zero index credit. However, it would be racking up the standard charges as well as the multiplier charges. So we're going to blow this up for you here. Again, there are the years there: 2000, 2001, 2002. We're showing 0 index credits to this hypothetical index account, during which time we are getting hit with 6-figure charges. Okay, so in those 3 years, the account value would receive 0 index credit, but would experience a $322,000 loss because of the charges. Now, in the very next year there, we see now the charge in that very next year is $91,729. So now in that 4-year period, now we see a drag of $413,909 in charges in those 4 years. In the first 3 years, the account would get credited 0, but look at the index credit in the 4th year. Actually, that would be policy year 31, 32, 33, 34. I should say index year 34 there would receive a $407,000 credit. So in those 4 years, based on the $413,000 of charges and the $407,000 in index credit, the total net over that 4-year period would create a $6,270 loss. But we've almost broken even on that comeback year. In the next year, over the 5 years of that sequence, we have created a $344,000 gain, because historically speaking, every time we've come out of a sequence of zeros, the S&P has typically been in the double-digit positive returns, in which case we would hit the cap. The cap would be multiplied by the multiplier bonus, and the credit would be credited as such. So it's a huge benefit, right? So when we back test the multipliers in these hypothetical index funds that we've created here with no leverage whatsoever, this is what we have found, okay? Over the last 40 years, the index fund with no multiplier would have performed the least out of the different options. The one with the medium multiplier would perform at second best. The one with the most aggressive multiplier performed the best out of those 3. But if you track that yellow line in the graph all the way up, the one with the high cap, that comes with a high cap charge, that was also complemented by the medium multiplier, substantially outperformed all the others. So the high cap option assumes an 80 basis point asset-based charge, and for that, it buys up the cap from 8.5% up to 11%. So again, the question when we look at some of these crediting methods is the 80 bip charge, additional charge, on top of the multiplier charge, is it worth it to buy up to a higher cap? Well, as we see here over the last 40 years of S&P historical performance, the answer is absolutely. If we look at a managed account with unlimited upside, unlimited downside, this one performed worse than the hypothetical index program we did with no multiplier at all, with the floor and the cap. Now, this managed account, here are the parameters. It is 100% S&P 500 correlated, so unlimited upside, unlimited downside. We're actually including the S&P dividends in that hypothetical account. We're assuming a 40 basis point all-in investment fee. So this would be almost like a Vanguard ETF fund or something like that. So very, very low all-in investment fee. From a taxation standpoint, we're assuming a $500,000 household income, married filing jointly. And we're assuming that this client lives in Texas, so there is no state income tax applied. No state short-term capital gains tax applied to the gains. And still, the construction that looks very similar to the IUL just beats up the unlimited upside, unlimited downside managed account. Okay, again, this is the last 40 years. Next up, we're going to take a look at the last 20 years of S&P performance, run back to back to create a 40-year period. And we see a very similar story told in the same order, where the high cap with the medium multiplier crediting effect is complementing the high cap crediting effect. And again, substantially better performance. Man, look at the poor managed account down there. The taxable managed account's getting really beat up. And then the third 40-year period we're going to look at is the sandwich. Okay, again, we are not including S&P dividends in these hypothetical index accounts that we've created with the floor and the cap, whereas the red line, the managed account, is 100% S&P correlated and does include the S&P dividends. The interesting thing here in the sandwich, without the S&P dividends, the compound annual growth rate during this time is 59 basis points. Horrible time. From a multiplier standpoint, we see that the no multiplier versus the heavy multiplier versus the medium multiplier come in very, very close within each other. However, the high cap option with the medium multiplier still pulls way ahead. And the poor, pitiful, taxable managed investment account, the red line at the bottom, is just getting left in the dust. So for advisors that want to show their client how the construction of the IUL is designed, if they are solely showing the carrier illustration with no other modeling, with no other viewpoints on how the crediting method actually works, you're showing a client a story that is so far from reality. It's in our opinion, it's really doing the client a disservice. This is the most transparent way to explain to a client how the crediting methods and the charges methods work while still staying AG 49 compliant, because our software is specifically saying this is not an IUL. This is a hypothetical index account with a floor and a cap that is S&P 500 correlated, that has charges and bonuses similar to those that exist in certain IUL multiplier products. But again, the most transparent view the client is ever going to see. You can only get this third-party software modeling done through Smart Capital. This does not exist anywhere in the market currently. Okay, and the last part I'll wrap up with is, how does this affect premium financing? Because Smart Capital, as much as I've shown you thus far, if this is the first time you've heard of us, we would appear to be a fintech company, right? We appear to be a software investment modeling firm. Our core business is in premium financing. And we believe that if you're going to introduce a premium financing solution to a client, you sure as heck ought to be able to model for them when things could get volatile in the market and how that would affect a premium financing arrangement. So a lot of folks that are not currently doing premium financing, one of their concerns is, well, multipliers already sound risky enough. If you introduce leverage into this through a third-party lender, through premium financing, man, you're just adding yet another layer of complexity, another layer of risk on top of everything. At Smart Capital, we decided to create a separate version of premium financing that eliminates those risks. So in our program, we have a fixed borrowing rate of 4.5% that's fixed for 10 years. So we have zero borrowing rate volatility. And when we model it and back test it using the same different 40-year periods that we showed you earlier, here's what we find. In premium financing, in our program, if you were to use the non-multiplier IUL, it performs a little bit worse than a managed account. Why? Well, because over the last 40 years, the S&P did very well. So the unlimited upside gives a little bit of advantage to the taxable managed account. Okay, next up here would be the medium multiplier performs second best. The most aggressive multiplier performed the best, and still that high cap with the medium multiplier, even in using our version of premium financing, far outperformed everything else, including that managed account. Huge difference. If we look at the last 20 years, Again, those are the parameters of the managed account. Again, 100% S&P 500 allocation, includes the S&P dividends, 49 BIP all-in investment fee. They are living in the state of Texas, so they are not being taxed on the gains at the state level, and still yet our version of premium financing, especially using the high cap version with performance, just pummels the other options. Okay, and then the last version here, this is, the second to last version here. This is the last 20 years of the S&P 500, run back to back, creating a 40-year period. Now we see here the non-multiplier version, again, performs the worst. The medium one performs second best. The maximum performs the best. The best by a long shot, again, is the high cap with the medium multiplier. And again, the pitiful managed account down there is not doing so hot compared to the other options. Lastly, here we look at the sandwich. And this tells a very interesting story. This is what everyone's concerned about, right? So with this particular crediting method, again, 0% floor, 8.5% cap, 80 BIP charge to buy up to the 11% cap. In this scenario here, we look at a very unrealistic worst case scenario. During this period of time, the financing option gets turned upside down a little bit. I mean, it still works, not quite as good as the managed account with no leverage, but look at the high cap with the medium multiplier using our premium financing. It's not even close. So this, again, is where we say, forget how you feel. Leave emotions out of this. If you're making an investment decision or accumulation decision or a future income drawdown decision, it ought to be mathematically based and it ought to be backed up with real math. And that's what our software has the ability to do that no one else's software has the ability to do. It's not even close. So when we make recommendations, whether it be Pacific Life or another carrier that has another suite of products to be used, we have the ability to test all that where we know what the best option is for that client in each one of those different scenarios. Okay, I'll wrap up here. This is yet another client here. This is a male, age 50, preferred non-tobacco, living in the state of Florida. In this case, we're using the PS6 product again. In this case, we're going to show a carrier compliant illustration, and we're going to show a non-finance version versus our omakase financed premium finance version. So again, male age 50, preferred non-tobacco, living in the state of Florida. If we look at them side by side, again, these numbers are taken right out of the carrier illustration, run at 5.41%. We are using the high cap option with the performance multiplier on both sides. We're showing an income drawdown starting at age 66 for a period of 20 years. Again, this is policy year 17 through policy year 36. And here's what we find here. The same $100,000 a year going into the non-financed IUL on the left-hand side versus $100,000 a year in client outlay going into our omakase design. Again, for details on our omakase premium finance design, there are tons of videos on our website at lionsmarkcapital.com. You can also go to www.myomakase.com for a client-friendly version that explains our program. But again, for both sides, $100,000 a year in outlay per year for 10 years. The non-finance version is going to buy them $2 million of initial face. In our omakase program, that's going to buy them $5.7 million in face. Huge difference to the client's advantage. The income drawdowns on the non-finance policy for those 20 years are going to be $130,000 versus $186,000, almost $187,000 in the omakase design. And after a 40-year period of drawing the income out and adding in the remaining surrender value of the policy, the non-finance version has a total economic value of $3.2 million versus $5.7 million in the omakase design. Same exact PS6 product, same exact high cap option, same exact performance multiplier, side by side, apples to apples. It's not even close. The nice thing about the omakase design, we've removed all interest rate volatility because we have a 10-year fixed locked-in borrowing rate in that program. They're never going to pay a penny more or a penny less than $100,000 a year, and there is no outside collateral needed to be posted and no personal guarantee on the loan in that particular lending package. It's a huge advantage to the client, not even close. Look at the comparison there, right? $2.5 million swing in favor of omakase. We have a 76.84% economic advantage to the client in the omakase design versus the non-financed design. Not even close. The last piece of this, and in my opinion, one of the most important pieces of the AG49A update that most people aren't even thinking about yet, is the issue of participating loans. So how is AG49A going to affect the illustrated income drawdowns? It's going to be a huge difference. This is where, if you really understand this, and you've been selling participating loans off the carrier illustration, you are going to feel like the sky is falling on your head come late November 2020. Here's why. The current spread allowed between the illustrated policy index credit and the participating loan rate is a 1% maximum spread. In other words, if you're illustrating with Pacific Life right now, their AG49 max for this product is 5.41%. Their participating loan rate that they're illustrating in that illustration is 4.65%. Okay? So Pac Life is being a little bit conservative here in the sense that they are showing a spread between the illustrated index performance and the participating loan rate at a little bit less than 1%. But what's going to happen with AG49A is that they are going to reduce the allowable spread from 1% to 50 basis points. In other words, if you're going to show an index credit of 5.41%, that means the participating loan rate is going to have to be shown at 4.91%, which is 50 basis points less than the index credit. So you're talking about a huge difference in the spread you're going to be able to show between the index credit and the par loan rate. What does that mean? It means the income you're going to be able to illustrate in these carrier illustrations is going to be a pittance of what it used to be. So if we look at the back-tested years of volatility and we look at that sandwich period, this is where the rubber meets the road from a mathematical standpoint. The question is, in this awful 40-year period, is the income using a participating loan going to work? On the surface, most people would say no, because if Pacific Life is going to show, say, a 4.65% participating loan rate, but we look at the compound annual growth rate of the S&P during that time, it looks to be like there would be a negative arbitrage. That is mathematically not true, and I will show you why. This is the sandwich period. The box that pops up there, those are the back-tested periods of time that we're going to model in this hypothetical index fund. Again, this is not an IUL. This is not Pacific Life's IUL. This is the hypothetical index fund, right? The synthetic index fund that's modeled using the same index credits and charge methods as the PS6 product with the performance multiplier. So those are the index credits over there under those assumptions. Here we see the income being pulled out of the policy using participating loans. Next up here, that is the participating loan interest, assuming a 4.65% participating loan interest rate. Okay? And those are the index credits, assuming that those funds coming out are kept in the index account, getting the index credit with the multipliers and all. Well, how is this possible? We're showing that by using a participating loan at 4.65%, during this awful period of time is actually creating, over that 40-year period, a 17% participating loan positive arbitrage outcome. How is that possible? Doesn't seem possible. Well, that's because you're not looking at the granular math. Let's look at the granular math on this. Here's what it looks like. Again, compound annual growth rate of the S&P 500 during that constructed 40-year period, we call the sandwich, is 59 basis points, not including S&P dividends. Okay. However, the average S&P return during that 40-year period without dividends is 2.49%. Okay. The average index credit, assuming the 0% floor and the 11% cap, is 5.53%. So it's greater, right? Why? Because we're eliminating the negative return years. But if we add in the performance multiplier on top of the 0% floor and the 11% high cap, the average net index credit during the backtested period is actually 9.65%. Now, that's the, I would call that the net gross index credit. That is the net index credit, but that comes at a cost, right? The cost of the multiplier. What is the average multiplier charge during that period of time? 3.86%, which means that the average net index credit, including the 0% floor, the high cap charge, and that performance multiplier charge, is going to net an average index credit of 5.79% over that 40-year period, that awful 40-year period. So if we're going to assume a 4.65% participating loan rate based on an average index net credit of 5.79% over that 40-year period, it's actually eking out a 1.14% average annual participating loan rate positive arbitrage. Long story short, the par loan works when you model the actual math, even in that terrible period of time, with this particular client, with this particular product, with this particular modeling assumptions. Okay? So, in summary here, the 40-year sandwich we just looked at actually creates a positive 1.14% positive arbitrage using the participating loan rate. The last 20 years of back-tested performance, it creates a 2.39% positive participating loan rate positive arbitrage. The last 40 years, it creates a 3.67% positive arbitrage. And the grand irony of all this is the new AG 49A regulations are going to limit it to 50 basis point positive arbitrage spread, right? So the folks that really understand the math, right, we're saying, hey, don't you want the truth? Can you not handle the truth? And this maximum allowable positive spread that is going to get enforced in November is so far from reality. This is fantasy. This is fantasy land. This is so far from reality. It's not even close. So again, if you are an advisor and you are accustomed to selling off the carrier illustration when it comes to income drawdowns, come November, you're going to be hurting because your value proposition is going to be a fraction of what it used to be. If you work in conjunction with Smart Capital, we have the ability to show the client how this actually works from an educational standpoint, from a mathematical standpoint, and from a compliance standpoint. Again, our software is saying this is not an IUL. This is not a life insurance policy. This is a hypothetical, synthetic produced index account with the crediting assumptions using a floor and a cap and a multiplier charge and a multiplier credit, a high cap charge and a higher cap applied. That's going to show the client what would happen in that model with all this volatility. All right. So I'll end with this. This new enforced minimal spread that the regulators are going to enforce on these carrier illustrations, this is like selling a Lamborghini that has 690 horsepower and goes 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, in reality, right, in tested performance reality that is quantifiable if you test it, but with the new AG49A regulations, this is like trying to sell this car and the product brochure says it's only 490 horsepower and only does 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds as opposed to 2.5 seconds, because we're trying to be conservative and not lead the client to believe something that may never happen. Well, is it possible that the Lamborghini in reality on a really hot day in the middle of Death Valley, when the person only put in 87 octane gas into it and supposed to 91 octane, and it doesn't have enough oil in there, that it might not do 690 horsepower? Yeah, it's possible. Under that circumstance, it might not do 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Yes, that's possible. But under normal assumptions, that is the likely outcome. And that is the big problem I have with the restrictions that are being put on these illustrations. We, as advisors, are going to be advising a client to buy something under an assumption that is so far worse than reality, than what history has told us and what mathematics tell us. But we have to be compliant and honor the AG49 ruling. So in the spirit of unsurpassed ethics, in the spirit of being transparent, in the spirit of being full disclosure to the client, we believe that we need to educate the client how these products work, in addition to showing them the carrier compliant illustration. And that is what we at Landsmark Capital have the ability to do from a technology standpoint that no one else in the industry has the ability to do. So we say, we don't often give life insurance advice when it comes to all of this, but if we were, by all the extensive backtesting we've done through our synthetic index models with the hypothetical floors and caps and charges and multiplier charges and multiplier credits, our mathematics tell us that using, in this particular case, if they were considering buying a Pacific Life policy, financed or non-financed, our mathematics tell us that the high cap option with the performance multiplier is a fantastic way to go. Obviously, there are other carriers that have multiplier products with different crediting methods that are very, very good as well. We're certainly fans of the Pacific Life product suite as well as them as a carrier, but we also have great relationships with other carriers. I hope I'm not leaving anyone out here. I probably will, but just to kind of go down the laundry list of carriers that we work with: Allianz, National Life Group, Nationwide, Hancock, Securian, Zurich, Penn Mutual. The list goes on and on. But for this particular webinar, I thought I would model the Pacific Life product simply because I was honored to be a co-presenter at the Pacific Life Symposium just a few weeks ago. So check us out at landsmarkcapital.com. This is our website. Currently, if you go to our website at the time of this webinar recording, you can actually download the e-version of this book. You can also buy it on Amazon. But this is a book that my business partner Jeff Fain and I published last summer of 2019. It's called The Definitive Book on Premium Financing: The Good, Bad, Ugly, and Insane Practices Used in a Controversial Industry. We are not fans of this free insurance or semi-free insurance programs that are out there. We are very conservative on our side, and we can take many of those programs, dump them into our stress testing software, and we see many of those programs blow up with just a little bit of volatility. So if you're looking at some of those programs, highly recommend just do the due diligence and use our program as a way to figure out what is in your client's best interest when it comes to premium financing IULs. So again, lionsmarkcapital.com. I'm Darren Sugiyama, one of the managing partners. Appreciate you guys being on this webinar. And again, check us out. We look forward to meeting you guys soon and working with you soon. God bless.